All right, I have a treat for you. I am here with Jim Miller, one of the world's top experts at sales, closing, uh, getting more customers, making more money. And so thanks for coming up from San Diego, being part.
My pleasure.
And you're now getting access to really, I basically said to Jim, a little background. Jim, one of the companies that I own and invest in, Jim is the head of sales, vice president of sales. And so I said, Jim, you've got how many years experience? 40 years?
About 40 years.
About 40 years experience, teaching sales, selling yourself, being a salesperson yourself, and building big teams. In fact, one of his claim to fame is building out Tony Robbins' whole sales.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Back in the early 2000s, about 2001, I came to Tony Robbins as the new vice president of sales and took on the task of taking a company that, for the most part, was in financial. Let's just say it was financially challenged. And in a period of 2.5 to 3 years, we built it to levels of profit that exceeded all the previous years combined in net profit. So we had a good ride.
That's awesome. Yeah. So now I said, Jim, you've got so much knowledge in your head. Let's get this out for entrepreneurs, for business people, for salespeople around the world to really understand. So I gave him a simple task. I said, today was your last day on Earth. And you wanted to, how many kids do you have?
I have two.
And you wanted to leave. Your kids wanted to grow up to be the most persuasive, best salespeople in the world. You had 24 hours to leave all your knowledge with them. What would you say? And of course, it would take more than 24 hours, but we've been recording a whole series that you're getting access to. So let's kind of, even before they get into your stuff, I always like at the beginning in the first video, just to give an opening kind of brain dump, I call it, like everything that people know. And I know you worked with Mikhail on our team here, who's the master of organization of ideas. So he laid out this basically 9 kind of principles. The first one being state.
Right.
And did you get that from Tony Robbins? I know Tony Robbins is big on state, or did Tony Robbins get that from you?
Well, Tony probably had that before me, because inducing state is not anything new. Maybe the way that I focus on it and the approach that I take to state induction might be a new spin on it, but my belief is that the entire sales process is focused on your ability to induce a state that basically renders the client more suggestible, so that they're more willing and more desiring to take action. And there's several different states. Not only you're inducing in the client throughout the process, but even before the process, you're inducing them in yourself.
So it's twofold. You have to get into a state.
Correct.
And that state is one, correct me if I'm wrong, the way you approach it is knowing that you have the best thing for the client, and every moment they're not in your program or using your product, right? They're losing. So they're actually coming to it as you're going to I'm not selling you, I'm doing you a favor.
That's correct. Because that's hopefully you're selling a product or a service that people benefit from. And so there's actually three main states that I look to induce in myself and that I teach to induce, and that is, first of all, that your life will benefit from an experience with my product or service way beyond the transaction itself.
Right. Way beyond the price.
Way beyond the price, and way beyond this initial decision or choice to actually get involved. Secondly, that I am not only the best person, but I'm the only person that you should engage in this transaction with, because I'm the one who's going to serve you and serve your needs and your desires more profoundly than anyone else will, because I'm more capable, I'm more qualified, I have more expertise.
Okay.
And then finally, the third is to get associated with immediacy and urgency, because the truth is nobody wants to do anything now. We always put things off.
Right.
So
risk aversion.
Correct.
Humans are risk averse. They're like, well, the more time I contemplate it, and really what they're saying is, I don't buy in.
I don't buy in because people
Right.
really have an aversion to uncertainty. They don't want to change. They want to stay in their status quo, and so they put things off.
So if you're watching this as an entrepreneur or as a salesperson, the first thing really to take away from Jim's methodology, and really the overall methodology that you're learning from me too, is that it starts with you as the person conveying the message.
Absolutely. And that's
Because people don't like that. People are often like, what's the trick? What's the one line that gets people? What's the ultimate? And you're really saying, look, I mean, and I believe this, if you study Dr. David Buss or any evolutionary psychological work, it's that the human brain is very good at reading other people. So when you approach someone with your product, subconsciously, they're going, do I buy into Jim?
That's
I buy
correct.
into Todd?
That's correct. And also, too, because emotions are so easily transferable, they're absorbed. So
Right.
if you're not in the state of urgency and need, it's impossible for you to transmit that because you're going to be incongruent. And
Right.
so the client, especially at a subconscious level, is going to perceive that, and they're going to remain immovable as well.
So do you have it? Can you think of a story, an example, where you were not in state and lost a big deal, or vice versa? You know, for example, do you feel when you're in state? Do you feel a different emotion? Are you super happy, super energetic, super sure of yourself? What is kind of the core feeling?
Here's the core feeling. That's a good question, by the way. No one's ever asked me that. The core feeling for me is actually a focus. It's an intense, laser-like focus on the individual across from me, what it is I'm looking to get accomplished, and the methodology, the steps that I'm going to use. Because I really, and you'll learn this, I don't allow the client to make the decision themselves. I decide for them.
Right.
Because I know what's best for them, and what they're going to bring to the game is uncertainty, the inability to make their own decisions, the false need to shop my product around, et cetera, et cetera. So they're really not qualified, and this is what, in working with Daniel Kahneman, as I did, you can see won the
Nobel Prize.
He won the Nobel
Yeah.
Prize. He's actually a psychologist, and he won the Nobel Prize in economics. And he won the Nobel Prize for his work in heuristics,
Yes.
which is our decision-making methodologies that we fall back on.
Yep.
And in the end, his conclusion is that we're not qualified to make decisions because we are untrained in formal decision-making methodology. So I never perceive, expect, or give a right to my client to make their own decision. So the core emotion, the core activity that I'm involved in is this intense focus to get through the process and to the outcome for both the client and myself.
It's interesting because, as people who are in different programs with me, as we study the world's best people, whether it's business people or not, really that I was just recording a live call the other day, and someone asked me the formula for becoming a millionaire, and one of the things is I put, million M equals and focus. Powers of intense focus are highly correlated with getting what you want out of life. So, and it's the same way of getting what you want from a sales situation. I think a lot of salespeople come to it haphazardly. A lot of business owners, think about it. It's easy. You have people, let's say you own a restaurant, not a traditional sales environment, right? But really, you're still doing the same thing. You're trying to convince people to walk in the door, and once they walk in the door, trying to convince them to buy, stuff from you. And we do it haphazardly. It becomes status quo. It becomes rote routine. But you're saying every day before you start your day, you got to rev yourself up into that place.
It's before every sales encounter. Absolutely.
So you're doing it not just once a day. You're doing it before each one.
That's correct.
Awesome.
Or for a group. Let's say you're making several calls at a time. You're getting focused prior to contacting that sequence of individuals.
So as we kind of, the big picture, as we map this out, and of course as always is changing, it's number one, elicit state. Number two, you put revisiting the past. Is that revisiting the pain points?
Yeah, exactly. Because one of the big mistakes that we make in sales is we're always forward looking, right? The ABC, always be closing, and that's a pushing the agenda forward. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is that we prematurely push a client forward who's not ready to make a decision into the call to action that we've put forth. And there's a reason. If you take the word decision, you break it down into its etymological, the suffix and the prefix. D means away from, and kaiare, which means to cut, right? And the word decision has the word scission in it, like scissors. So actually the first impulse in a decision is actually a backward consideration. Because unless we visit the past and extract that individual from the status quo, remind them, or certainly induce or accentuate the state of dissatisfaction that they have with their status quo, until we do that, we can't effectively ask them to move into another state. And that's why salesmen, for the most part, industry-wide in sales, only close 20% of their deals.
Right.
Because they're bringing people to the close unprepared.
Even if you have a website, even if you're not in traditional sales, you're an entrepreneur, you've got a website, or you've got a physical product or store, it's still the same thing. You have to remind people of the pain point. Because those are the two, Freud, civilization is discontent. He says, he was asked what the purpose of life is. He said, that's too hard of a question. But he said, the question of what humans do is easier. And they move towards happiness, which he says is moving towards intense pleasure and moving away from pain and discomfort. So what you're basically saying is you must have people come into a place where they remember that they had pain and discomfort in the past, doing their old way.
Not only in the past, but what it's extracting in the moment, and what it will continue to extract progressively. And it's important to emphasize that the longer the pain remains with them, the longer the state of scarcity or dissatisfaction remains, it becomes progressively worse. And it's also, too, if you study negotiations, which I do, from the program of negotiation at Harvard, all of the literature of formal negotiation strategy teaches you that people are more risk tolerant when they perceive a sense of loss or they perceive an experience of pain. You're more willing to engage in new behavior, different behavior, if you perceive that.
So the risk tolerance is not to stay in the old. You're saying take a risk to make a change, try a new product, buy a new program, whatever it is that the salesperson or the business is selling.
Right.
So once you get them into that kind of disheveled, not in an unethical way, but I'm saying you rile them up and go, hey, grab them by the shoulders and say, where are you going? Do you like it? No. Well, you're still headed that direction. Let's turn around here.
Correct.
The old saying is, when you reach the edge of a cliff, sometimes the only way out is backwards.
That's correct.
And it's hard to move people backwards, but if you get them to the edge of the cliff mentally, it's much easier.
And this is the emotional inducement, the state inducement of the pain that they feel, whether conscious or subconscious or both, every time that they have an experience of deprivation or dissatisfaction. And so it's important for you to associate them with that pain in the moment, so that they're now prepared to move forward into a conversation of moving into your product or your service, which is basically an opportunity, a pathway of opportunity.
And even advanced salespeople, I was at this Titans of Copywriting. Some of the best salespeople in the world. Guthrie Rinker was there in boardroom and Agora and all that. And one of the things that one of the guys, Guthrie Rinker, I forget which one, was speaking, and this is a guy you're talking doing a couple $100 million a month,
right?
Proactive, all this kind of stuff. He said, someone asked him, what do you need to do? What do you do to keep your sales going up? He says, I remember the fundamentals. I go back to everything and go, am I doing all of the ingredients? And this is a huge ingredient. That's easy to forget if you consider yourself an advanced salesperson.
That's correct. Once you master this technique, and you begin mastering with focus by being aware that if you're not using this in your sales methodology, then you're basically just intercepting business. And that's why the sales industry, for the most part, only closes, again, 20% of the opportunities they have, which is a crime.
So you're saying you're not creating sales, you're just intercepting.
You're just intercepting.
Ones, and that's why
For the
you're
most
only
part.
going to get 1 out of 5.
That's correct. And also, too, even the sales you make, you're going to lose because they're going to cancel, right? How
Right.
many companies have this extraordinary cancellation rate because they're using artifice and they're bringing people, pressuring people, or enticing people into closing without it being truly an authentic close where the client feels the need, desire, it's right for them, and they've made the conclusion, the decision themselves.
Like the great French philosopher Voltaire said, it's not enough to conquer, you have to seduce.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So what you're
That's
basically
correct.
saying is people feeling like it's their decision.
That's correct.
You didn't just come in with brute force and go, we had this guy. You said, hey. So what's the example? You come in and you say, let's say you're selling somebody on weight loss.
Right.
Just take. You come in there and what would you say? Would you try to get them to tell you a story of when they were overweight, things they've lost out by being overweight, shame? What would you do?
Well, that's a good question
I'm
because
putting you on the spot, but
it's actually all of them. It's because again, it's somewhat of a Dickens process, right? You know the Christmas story, Charles Dickens with the Ghost of Christmas Past, Christmas Present, and Christmas Future. And basically, it's really a Dickens process where you're saying, you're reminding them, listen, there's a reason why we're having this conversation, right? Because they're seeking a solution. They're wondering what it is that you have that they don't have already. And if you can show them that there's something that you have for them that they're not available to or not aware of, then they're going to stay intrigued. So I remind people that there's a reason why you and I are talking. It's because you're having an experience of pain. You're not living life to the level or at the level that you desire. And so what I'd like for you to do is bring me into that. Share with me what it is that you're experiencing, let's say from the beginning. How far does this go back? And how does it show up emotionally over the years? This situation of whether it be obesity or dissatisfaction with your current weight, how is that manifesting itself emotionally, and even in the actions you take, the decisions that you've made in the past, the lost opportunities? Share with me if you would, so that I can get an appreciation of your world.
right, and then you just sit back and let them weave the tale of pain, discomfort,
and ask further questions, drill down on the questions. It's important.
Right. So if somebody said, well, I've been overweight since I was in high school, and kids used to laugh at me, and now that I'm older, I feel like I'm setting a bad example for my kids, and blah, blah, blah. Right. You might go deeper by saying,
well, I would say, let's take those experiences where you were either ridiculed or taunted because of that. There were certain emotions that evoked, maybe shame, maybe embarrassment, maybe even anger. But more importantly, there were conversations that you had as a result of those emotions that became your self-speak, that became your inner voice that's now, even to this day, driving your decisions and how you perceive yourself. So what were you telling yourself in those moments?
right. So then you let them go deep. You're just going.
They're going now deep. I want them to go deep into their psychology. And what I really want to know is, what are you telling yourself about yourself?
It's like Alan Nation told me, to get to the root of any problem, you ask why 3 times. So you go,
Yes.
It's like, why did that make you feel bad? And then they say, well, because all the kids, no one liked me. And then you say, well, why did you want to be liked by the kids? Well, because I wanted to fit in, I don't know, or need.
Yes.
Why'd you want to fit in? Well, there was one boy that I liked, and he
Yes.
didn't give me the time of day.
Right.
So a woman who's overweight might tell you that story, and you might draw them in with those 3.
Yeah, because that's exactly right. Because it's important to drill down, because most of us who have experienced pain have created a story around it. And really, what I'm not looking for is the story. I'm looking to associate you beyond the story with the actual event, so that it's somewhat of a time travel.
Right.
So, I mean, and truly, you can actually feel how you felt in that moment once someone gets you past the story that you've created as a defense mechanism, you see.
So The first one, people, you're getting into state both for yourself as the person with the product, and then getting the other person into the state.
Correct.
And we've got further stuff, material. You're going to go into this much more deeper.
Yes.
This is just kind of an overview of the 9 or so basic areas. The second one, we talked about revisit the past. Now let's talk about the third one, which is getting a commitment from people. So we talk a lot about this in the 25 cognitive biases. One of the strongest is commitment consistency. If you can get people, draw a line in the sand, like you see in war movies.
Right.
It's like, who will go with me?
Right.
And once the process of just going across that line is half the battle.
Right.
So tell us more what you see in terms of how do you get people to commit, what that ends up doing for your sales closing ratios too.
Right. So what a commitment to me is, in sales, the traditional commitment is a commitment forward, meaning that, if the price is right, if you feel comfortable with the company and the product, and if it fits in your budget, would you commit to me that this was something you would consider going forward with, right? So we're always focused on getting a forward commitment when in fact, really, again, we're premature. Because what we want to do is we want to focus on aligning with the client and getting a commitment to sever their attachment to the past, right? To no longer be willing to allow whatever the experience or the condition is to now dictate their future and define the rest of their lives. And so we get them, again, like you said, to draw that line in the sand that from this point forward, I'm no longer going to be available for that situation defining my life and defining my emotions, right? Because remember, in going through the Dickens process, what we did is we brought them into the future and they realized the cost that situation, if they stayed in it, is going to extract on their life, especially the opportunity
As the billionaire
cost.
Charlie Munger says, the hardest thing to understand in investment, even for billionaires, is opportunity cost. Because, like you're saying in the Charles Dickens story, the future isn't, you don't see it unless somebody like you or you learn to bring people into the future. And then, so it's really a commitment to say, it's too painful for me to lose out every day, every moment on the opportunity of what I could have. So what they're committing to is no longer settling.
That's correct.
For the present or the
past.
That's
correct. Because they now finally, because it's so, like you said, we've induced a state that they no longer feel tolerant of this condition, because this may be the first time that it's actually been examined. It may be the first time that consciously they may have had a conversation about it beyond the story, right?
Right.
And have had an individual give them feedback in a very safe and understanding, empathetic type of conversation. And so what they're doing is they're hearing the story and they're hearing the situation themselves, and they're going, you know what? I'm no longer settling for this.
Right. And that takes a lot, but like you said, if you're following the steps that we're laying out for you,
and focused, remember, focus,
state, bring them into pain, and then you say once they've fully revisited the pain,
right?
Then you're saying, like you said, with the Harvard work that you've done, that allows them to come into a new place where they draw the line in the sand,
right?
And they go, I'm not willing to do that anymore. It's
a
new day.
And they're no longer anchored into their status quo. You see, all of us go through life looking to be centered, to be anchored, so that everything is predictable, everything is, manageable, right? Because this is consciously and subconsciously we seek this. And so what we're doing now is we're basically getting them to cut away, to extract from that anchored position. And so where they are right now is they're basically kind of adrift, right? We've created conflict. And so anytime you put an individual into this tension of conflict, they're now seeking resolution.
I see.
So they're committing to the journey of resolution that they perceive you have, even though you haven't stated it yet, because you have effectively taken them through this process and induced this state of no longer desiring or being tolerant of their status quo.
So now let's move to, so that's number 3. created commitment, and we've got more advanced videos specifically on how you do that.
Correct.
What they need to say, what you need to say to get them in place. But in this overview, let's keep going. Number 4, detachment from identity. So you want to bring them to a place where they no longer identify with the old.
That's correct. Where they actually are able to step outside of themselves and see themselves as a separate individual, suffering from losing out of opportunity because of that situation. You see, again, before I could bring them forward, I have to extract them from that which shackles them to the past or to the present. Right? So we do this by basically disintegrating them, giving them the permission to disintegrate from the old behavior and see themselves involved in the old behavior and no longer be intolerant of it.
So if it's let's go back to this analogy, not that that's necessarily a business you're in, but if it's in weight loss, you're basically saying to people, once they've committed, I'm not willing to be overweight. Now you're saying you have to get them to see themselves and not identify with themselves as this overweight person.
That's correct. In other words, to start to basically to admit to themselves by visualizing who they are and who they have been up until this point as a person living in dissatisfaction, right? Because this is really where they are. They're dissatisfied, and this dissatisfaction is manifesting itself in, in a number of different emotions that are basically extracting from them the opportunity to be happy and to be fulfilled in their human experience. So you see them, you have them visualizing themselves of making the wrong decisions. So you can even create scenarios, right, where you present to them, listen, you're at a restaurant, you've got a menu, and on one side is salads, and on the other side are, French fries and greasy hamburgers and hot dogs, and now you see yourself actually ordering the wrong type of food that has got you to this point. Are you satisfied with that?
Right.
What would you tell yourself in that moment now? What would you ask of yourself? Would you want yourself, if you could go back 5 years, would you have wanted yourself to make different decisions?
Powerful, yeah, and I think that this is a huge step. Make sure you watch the more advanced as we go in depth on, or Jim goes in depth on this, because ego, and I don't mean that in an arrogant standpoint, I mean that from a psychological standpoint. Ego is really how we survive. It's our sense of being and who we are. So when you're asking people to change the very core, you must have skill.
You must have skill and technique.
Yes.
Which is or for your sake, right? Because this is something that I've been studying and executing into for a number of years. So to give you some hope, you don't have to be at the skill level that I am. What you have to be skillful at is executing the technique.
Right, which you're getting here.
Which you'll get the technique. That's correct.
So we're laying out the technique. That comes after this overview. So the next thing, number 5, we have to readjust their perspective. So how do you like to do that?
Well, readjusting your perspective, and this is kind of a subset to also dealing with their identity. To readjust your perspective means to enable you to see things differently, in order to give you a new set of eyes, a new vision about what is possible and what the opportunity is beckoning them into, right? Because it's also getting an individual to realize and take responsibility for their lives. When I was listening to an interview on the way up here from San Diego by Viktor Frankl, and he said one of the things that's very important in our lives in order to find the meaning is to realize that we are responsible for our own happiness, for creating and finding meaning in our lives. And so this is the journey that we begin them on, and creating this new perspective of what it is they have the opportunity to move into.
So we've detached them, pain, we're beginning to sculpt and get them to envision a new outlook, a new sense of self, and now we're taking that deeper and deeper by continually readjusting their perspective.
That's correct.
So next, after we've gotten them to readjust their perspective, now it's opening a pathway of opportunity.
Correct.
So is this the Dickens Father Time, the future? We're laying out the opportunity.
Yeah, this is now us giving them the opportunity to move, right? Because now they're looking for resolution. They're looking to experience what is possible because you've created this new identity for them. You've created this sense of no longer wanting to tolerate their existing or previous identity. And so now what we're doing is we're bringing the future into the present, right? Because really that's what the future is. The future is the present always unrealized, right? And so what we're doing is realizing the future in the present, and we're opening the door. We're letting them know that this is something that's possible for you now that you've extracted from and you've become intolerant of the identity that you brought to the conversation previous.
It's like Warren Buffett talks about, he says, to live the life that people want, the good, I call it the good life. He said, you have to say, what's it going to look like at 80? Or what do I want it to look like at 80? Then to get it there at 80, what did it have to look like at 70? To be there at 70, what did it have to... And so you're working backwards from the future,
right?
Which is what most people don't do. Most people do the opposite. They're in the present, they're lost in the present, they are expecting the future to magically get better.
Right.
But it doesn't work that way.
That's correct. That's correct.
So you're taking the client, the customer, through that process.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a body of work that focuses on goals. I'm doing a lot of research into it right now, and it's fascinating. But what it does, it's creating a goal intention, meaning that we will more assuredly achieve what it is we desire if, number one, we identify a strong goal intention that's specific. So what would that look like in the idea of weight loss? What it would look like is this. It would be, I intend, right? Speaking into the vernacular of intention. Not I want to, not I hope to, but I intend to achieve a physique that is 4% body fat, where I'm in fantastic physical shape, where I'm working out consistently, I'm eating nutritiously and feeling not only healthy, but I'm feeling sexy, I'm feeling vibrant, and I also intend to be a sign to contribute back to the world to help people who are like me right now, to help them also reach this. So this is a very specific goal intention that has, number one, specific arrival and
numbers kind of thing.
It has different numbers.
Right.
And then it also has an aspect of contribution, of giving back, right? Now, in order to reach that goal intention, we now create what are called implementation intentions. So I am going to implement specific activities and specific thoughts and patterns that are going to enable me to arrive at that goal intention specifically.
Yeah, I think that Martin Seligman, the famous positive psychologist, he says if you can wrap it in something bigger than yourself too, that creates a more authentic sense of purpose and happiness. So, like you said, if you're selling weight loss to somebody overweight, you're going, not only is this going to benefit you, but at the end of the day, we're going to wrap this thing around in changing the world and you being part of societal change. Because humans are social creatures.
That's correct.
We get value when we feel like we're giving value to people.
Yes. As again in the conversation with Viktor Frankl, he was giving a story about when he was in the concentration camps, how he had two colleagues there that were bent on suicide. Mm-hmm. And so he asked them, why is it that you want to end your life? And he said, because I don't see there's no purpose in life for me anymore. Mm-hmm. And so he said, he didn't know what to say in that moment. It just came out almost organically. He says, but what if life sees a purpose in you?
Right.
And it struck both of these men so significantly that one of them was actually writing a book on geography, a series of books on geographies, and he realized how the world would benefit from this book, from this series of books. And another one had children, that he realized that the children would benefit them from him being around. So a lot of time when we can't even see our own purpose, we can focus on the purpose that the world is looking from us.
Yeah, right? For sure. Now, this next part, and by the way, as you're watching this order that we're doing things are not, this is just kind of my order for this conversation. As you go through this actual system, there'll be more in order, but these are kind of as they struck me. So, the next thing that I wrote down here, number 7 in my list, I know you've got your own list, but for this, state of abundance, teaching this state of abundance, every day, can't wait to wake up. Is that critical that people really get into that place where they feel like the world is mine if I go out and grab it,
Well, it's critical that you get into it first.
Okay.
Right? Again, because you're going to sell what you believe. You're going to influence other individuals into your own convictions, the strength and the urgency and the depth of your own convictions and beliefs. And if you are believing abundantly about your product or your service or the state of abundance that is going to create in their lives, then you're going to speak that vernacular. Everything that you speak will speak of possibility, abundance, freedom, enjoyment. And trust me, they are listening, especially at a subconscious level, to your pattern of speaking, right? Because the subconscious basically helps us filter the world by identifying patterns, and it helps us make sense of the world. Mm-hmm. So if you're consistently speaking into a pattern of abundance, then you actually are more believable. You're more congruent. And that congruency will break down resistance, right? Resistance breaks down in the face of congruent persistence.
And in a way, people want leadership. So really you're leading, you're becoming a leader, and leaders have to have the ability, it's like Conrad Hilton, the great, started Hilton hotel chain, great grandfather, Paris Hilton. But he said what changed his life at 15, he ran across a book on his mother's table by Helen Keller on optimism. And so leaders have the ability to be optimistic in the midst of disaster.
That's correct.
Courage, all those things. So that's part of abundance too.
It absolutely is, because the truth is that the world happens agnostically, meaning that there's most of what happens, there's no value until we interpret value into it, right? So I was listening to a story of a young guy in Texas who had an accident and broke his neck, and he became a speaker, and he said I broke my neck didn't break me, right? And it was very powerful, because how he sees life, how he interprets life, is a way, invites us to really challenge our own interpretations, because the truth is that, number one, not everything is supposed to go our way. There is suffering that the human experience is supposed to experience, right? But we find ourselves being victimized by suffering as if it's something bad, as opposed to embracing it as, for example, as a learning opportunity. Right. Or as an opportunity to share in the suffering of someone else, so that we can become more associated with their lives, right? So seeing abundance, you can see abundance in anything. You can see an abundance of pain. You can see an abundance of scarcity. You can see abundance in opportunity to move into any state that you want. It's all in your interpretation. It doesn't require you to be positive either. Right. It's not a false state of induced positivity. Right. It's a new interpretation of embracing life as it comes, and being very thoughtful and careful not to attach a negative lens, so that you're seeing it and you're seeing yourself as a victim. So this is where the abundance is, because what it does is it now, again, it frees your prospect to move powerfully into a new reality, to embrace it.
And that's like Stephen Hawking I was watching. He was talking about, the meaning of life and the universe, and he really said, and this is, maybe the highest IQ guy of our time, and he said, you create your own reality. Life has meaning in the sense that you attach meaning to it. Now, he wasn't talking about from a sales and closing, but everywhere you look, from visualization of guys like Kobe Bryant, the famous basketball player. He plays basketball sometimes. Shaquille O'Neal walked in the gym one time and there was Kobe Bryant alone with no basketball, but dribbling, playing, shooting, even without a ball, because he was visualizing, he was getting himself into this understanding of even without the ball, right? Even without the thing that, see, usually basketball has meaning from the ball. It's a sport that needs the ball.
Correct.
But he was assigning meaning even before. He was assigning, I call it an end game goal. You called it, the Dickens, the future. Without even that thing that everybody generally associates basketball with. He's still able to create meaning. And
That's
if you
correct.
can do that as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, as a salesperson, you're 10 steps ahead of everybody else.
Oh, absolutely. That is, if you have chosen in your life to become, to experience this abundance in your career in sales, then this is how you do it. This is, those of us who have experienced success and abundance at this level, this is how we do it. We truly focus on these psychological activities where we visualize. I mean, Albert Einstein was working at a patent office when he developed the theory of relativity, and it was all done in his head in mind experiments, right?
Yeah.
The capacity to visualize a hopeful future, right, is what's going to determine the quality of your life. Because for every negative thought you have, I can give you 100 counter reasons why you have the opportunity to be positive about it, right?
So
It's
that's
just
you're
reframing
bringing that to the sale. You're positive. You're bringing them in positivity. And then the next one, I have this as whatever, number 8, regather commitment. So
Yes.
are you getting closer to the close here? Are you saying, look, you've said you want something different for your life?
Yes. So in other words, now what we're doing is we're now going to take ownership, because again, remember earlier we said that we are the ones who are responsible for the outcome of this encounter.
Yes.
So now it's my responsibility to always be aware of where my client is or my prospect is emotionally, where they are in whether they're perceiving themselves inwardly or extrinsically, whether or not their attention is focused on me or on themselves. And now what it is I'm doing is I'm starting to gather the focus into the immediate, right? Because I am a one-call closer. I have never closed a deal the next day, ever in my life. I always gave away those to my colleagues, the people that I could not close for some reason that said, call me tomorrow. I gave it away, and I made sure that I felt the pain of when my colleague closed that deal the next day, if they did, because I knew I lost the opportunity. They could have been closed had I been more effective, right? So what I want my client to get associated with is the immediacy, the opportunity we have in this moment to actually opt for a new abundance in our life, to say goodbye to and no longer tolerate the state of deprivation that they came to this encounter with, and to get them associated with the fact that it's not only okay, but it's the right thing to do. It's appropriate for them to make this choice for themselves with me in the moment while they're in state, before the conversations of the past overwhelm them and talk them out of this change.
So that's the regathering. And then, now, I put this out of order, but no sales conversation is complete without this. As you've been going through this whole process of state commitment, you must create rapport, a sense of we get along, a sense of you're like me. That's, in the cognitive biases, that's the one called liking and disliking. People want to do business with people that they like and see some commonality. So how are you doing this, creating this rapport? What's your general concept here?
Well, we all know that rapport begins in the beginning, right? So everybody is coming to an encounter again with their status quo. They're bringing who they are to the encounter, and the first thing that I want to focus on is what not to do. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to put myself in conflict or in contrast to who it is that they're showing up as.
Okay.
What I want to do instead is to focus on using my sensory acuity on who it is they're showing up as, meaning their physiology, their rate of speech, their breathing, their emotions, the manifestation of those emotions in their facial features, and how it is that they are overall giving this aura about their encounter with me. So there is a hypersensitivity I want to make available to the initial encounter so that I can move appropriately into strategies and technique of creating rapport.
So the rapport then, as you're going through these things, are you trying to match them, or are you so if they're speaking slowly, if their face shows tenseness, are you matching that, or are you trying to get authority over that and understand it? What are you trying to go there?
Well, initially what I'm doing is executing into a strategy called pace and lead, where I'm meeting that person where they are, because it's actually a very it's magnanimous to meet a person where they are, because what it does is it gives them recognition of their own identity. It basically gives them somewhat of an approval that I'm willing to come to you on your terms, right? And people appreciate this, and especially the subconscious, because they don't get this feeling that they have to be me, but that I'm willing to meet them at a place that they're comfortable by using sensory acuity and beginning very slight and subtle transition into a mirroring technique where I am looking to mirror their physiology, their rate of speech, their breathing, and their gesticulations, right? How they move their hands and their head. And some people would say, well, isn't that being manipulative? Yes, it is. And what's wrong with manipulation? Listen, if you were having a heart attack and for some reason they were unable to resuscitate you using the electrical shock, then the next thing they're going to do is cut you open, rip open your rib cage, and that doctor's going to reach in and start manipulating your heart to get it to beat again. So this is a beneficial manipulation so that a person can speak comfortably. You're not raising critical filters. You're not inciting mistrust or dislike. You're letting that person know, I'm not like you, but I can meet you where you are. Mm-hmm. I can authentically step out of who I am and move into more of who you are and meet you there in an empathetic gesture.
And that's similar to, I've developed this PACE system, this personality typing, practical, action, social, and emotional. And I talk about how, Casanova, one of the great persuaders of all time, he says, you have to play the chameleon. Mm-hmm. That was his angle, meaning if you're with someone practical, which in the speak of rapport would be mm-hmm. someone a little more rigid, then you could become like a little more chameleon, like in order for them to let down their guard. It's not manipulation in a negative way. I like to call it the chameleon. I mean, you can call it manipulation, mm-hmm. positive manipulation, but people at the end of the day, I always say to my staff, there's one person that everybody loves. It's themselves. Right. So the more as they associate you with right. themselves, the love and the light goes up, and your message is able to penetrate that hard exterior that all people have.
Absolutely. Yeah, because it's foolish for me to speak from an emotional perspective when I'm speaking to an engineer, for example.
Right.
They're listening.
That's a P type, and emotional would be an E type, and
that's correct.
It doesn't always work out that way. Well, if you come to them too differently.
That's correct. Because they're subconsciously not recognizing patterns of speech. They're not processing what it is that you are saying in a way that they're comfortable with, and so all you're doing is creating conflict and friction.
Yes. So next, two more things as we talk. Earning the right. And, this is everything from alpha positioning of authority. What do you do to earn the right so that they know I'm a busy person, but I want to talk to Jim?
Right. So I figure again that I owe it to my prospect to inform them why it is that they should spend their valuable time and their focus on engaging in a conversation with me, right? So I, first of all, am the one who has to earn the right for them to listen. And I provide that by framing myself as someone that is, to use Jay Abraham's method, one of his strategies of influence, as a preeminent source, a source of preeminence, meaning that I have unique and specific information that will benefit your life that you're unable to ascertain on your own, either because you don't have the willingness or the ability, and or because no one else has it accessible to you like I do.
Right.
Right. So I'm going to tell you who it is that I am and do so in a way that I posture myself as being someone that is important to your life. Not just important, but I'm important to you. And what happens is my prospect starts hearing me as someone that they recognize that they will willingly give the permission of authority to. You see, it's not a taking or a wresting authority from them, but it's having them basically acquiesce authority so that now I'm in this given alpha state and they have assumed a beta or an alpha minus state, right? Depending on their personality type.
So, when you talk about this, I was just in the UK with John Lee, who is one of the top guys selling from the stage, and he says the same thing. He says people too often, speakers, salespeople, businesses, they forget that people are bombarded by supposed experts, whether it be from the media, and if you just get up there and expect people to trust and respect you, even if they know who you are, that's a fool's game. You must continually remind them, here's why I've earned the right
That's correct.
for you to listen to me.